Okay, perfect. Thank you. And welcome everyone to another seminar of the Behavioral Forum. The Behavioral Forum is this collaborative platform created by scientists for scientists to discuss animal behavior, and is a space where you can ask questions, put some guides and protocols, have some news from the community, even jobs opportunities, and informations about events, meetings, and training. Here you can see oops, a print screen of how it does look. So it's very easy to communicate, and it's really a space that we created for all of us. There is no excuse anymore to feel alone in science because you can always discuss with us here in the forum. And in line with this, we are organizing this workshop series of different talks. They always happen on a Thursday at 12:30 Central European Time. So during lunchtime, so that you can be with your lunch and have fun with one of our speakers. There is ways to apply to be a speaker. There is ways to apply to be a host. So we really want this project to be a community project and not only an individual project. And you can get all this information on the forum or our LinkedIn page. What we expect from our talks is actually to interact. You have an opportunity to interact with the speakers before, during, and after the talk. So we published every time information about the talk that is going to come in the forum. And there you have a space to already put your questions and that you want to ask in advance to our speakers. And the idea would also be to discuss later, to continue the discussion on the forum. So it doesn't stop here in this Zoom talk. Benoit, you need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry. So today we will host Nikoloz Sirmpilatze. I hope I don't misspell it. Also known as Nico. So Nico is a neuroscientist based in London. He's a senior research software engineer in the Neuroinformatics Unit, working across the Sainsbury Wellcome Centre and the Gatsby Computational Neuroscience Unit at UCL. So his work focuses on open and reproducible science, and he developed open source tools to study the brain and behavior. He leads the development of Movement, a Python package for analyzing animal motion. And he has also contributed to Brain Globe and to new brain atlases for emerging model organisms. He's also a fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute, where he supports open source practice and train early career researchers. And today he will present Movement, the Python toolbox for analyzing motion tracking data. So this toolbox provides a simple and unified way to work with motion tracking data. It supports outputs from tools like DeepLab Cut, Sleep. It started with data cleaning and kinematics analysis, but now it's expanded toward way more analysis to study interaction between animals and their environment. And it's also designed to be accessible by the community for non-experts in coding. So this is very relevant for many of us working with behavioral data. It really helps to turn our raw tracking data into meaningful results. So we are really happy to have you, Nico, and thank you again for accepting our invitation. It is a real pleasure to have you today, and now I'll leave you the floor, and you can share your screen.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I think that, Benoit, you need to stop your screen share so I can start mine. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction, for the very kind introduction. I think it was very comprehensive and almost I could skip giving the talk because you covered all the most important bits of movement already. And I will say that I'm very happy to be speaking here because I'm a longtime fan and member of the Behavior Forum. I post there occasionally. I also read others' posts, and it's really a great space. And I'm very happy that this webinar series is happening. I hope you can see my screen, and if not, let me know. And with that, I will get started. So I'll be talking about movement, the Python toolbox we have been developing in the Neuroinformatics Unit for analyzing motion tracking data. But before I dive into what the package does exactly, let me take a step back and kind of zoom out and assess what is the goal that we're all trying to achieve here. Well, probably everyone in this call, or most people in this call, are studying animal behavior in some form, and are interested in measuring behavior, so quantifying it, extracting some quantitative measures of behavior from data. And this is tricky because it's hard to define behavior. Many have tried, and I like the Timbergen's definition, as the total movements paid by the intact animal. The reason I like this definition is because of the emphasis on movement, and movement is something very concrete and very quantifiable, and we can measure it precisely. So we can get a handle on it. And we have various instruments for doing that. A very popular instrument is video cameras, so videography, and this is what I will talk about exclusively in this talk. But just to mention, there are also other methods like inertial measurement units that you attach on the body, like accelerometers, to measure the angle and acceleration of particular joints. You can also attach GPS-based biologgers to animal, and these are good for studying movements at very large time scales and large spatial scales. But today we are talking about videos, just to be clear. And the problem with videos is that you need a way to extract the movement out of this moving image, the video. And the traditional way of doing that is motion capture, which is very common or commonly used in the entertainment industry, let's say in movies or in animation. And the idea there is that you have a subject wearing a suit with multiple reflective markers. The subject goes into a room with tens of cameras looking at them from multiple directions. These cameras detect the reflective markers in 3D, they triangulate them, and what you get out of there is very clean, very high quality 3D kind of motion tracking data, which is amazing. But the problem is that this process is very expensive and it's kind of invasive because you have to wear the suit and the markers. So animal researchers who normally don't have the resources of like big movie production companies, they resort to more kind of simple methods. One of them is showcased here in this paper, where you put some colored markers, in this case on ants, and you can then kind of filter the images you get out of the video to find these colors. You can track them over time, and this is kind of a way to tracking motion. But in the last 10 years or so, with the advent of machine learning, there's the new name of the game is so-called markerless motion tracking. And this was popularized mainly by DeepLabCAD, which is a very popular tool for doing pose estimation and tracking in animals. And it's one of the first tools that offer the easy-to-use interface that for researchers around the globe to use it. And in the meantime, we have seen multiple other tools which are working a similar way. So we have DeepLabCAD, we have Sleep, we have Lightning Pose, and we have many, many others, which I will not mention here, which are kind of developed by different groups in different countries, working with different species. But they are all great at what they do, and they offer kind of easy-to-use interfaces for doing this kind of task. So what is the task? The most commonly performed task is pose estimation. So you start with videos, you extract some frames from the video, you annotate those frames manually, so marking the body parts you are interested in. For example, you click on the nose, on the ears, on the shoulders, depending on the study. And then, like everything else nowadays, you train a neural network to be able to recognize these body parts in new frames. Then you give the video to the neural network, and it sees new frames and it learns to predict these body parts in the new frames. When you join up those key points, as we call them, across time, you get these continuous tracks of motion. And a bit of terminology here. So by pose, I mean the set of key points that form a skeleton over an animal. And the task that these neural networks perform is called pose estimation. This is usually followed by the second step, which is joining up those estimates across time. This is called tracking. So the thing you see on the right-hand side here could be called pose tracking because it's estimating the poses and then tracking them across time. So pose estimation is not the only thing you can do with videos and motion tracking. So this is one way of tracking motion. But just to mention, there are others. So in the simplest case, you can detect a single point over the animal, let's say it's centroid, and track that. You can also detect a bounding box around the animal and follow that bounding box across time. In other approaches, you can segment the image into pixels that belong to the animal and pixels that do not belong to the animal. So what you get is a mask of the animal, essentially, and you can also track that. But regardless of how exactly you're tracking the animal, most of the approaches nowadays use neural networks to do that. And this has been great for animal behavior science so far because we could do things that we could not dream of doing like 10, 15 years ago. We can, while before we had to like manually annotate and code videos by hand, now we can very fast and at scale generate these vast amounts of motion tracking data on like hours and days and weeks longs of videos. And this has been embraced by multiple fields. So neuroscience, which is my own field, but also psychology, biomechanics, zoology, conservation ecology, veterinary science, animal welfare, and maybe we have representatives from those fields here today. But basically, people from all of those fields are now starting to use or thinking about using these markerless computer vision-based methods to track the motion of animals. And this has been great so far because it means that there is also a convergence across different fields that maybe were not talking so much to each other before, but now are using kind of very similar methods. But what happens after the tracking is done? So remember that our goal is to quantify and describe behavior. Our goal is not to detect points in videos. So the job is not done once you have your developed CAD model trained and run. What you want to do is extract some variables of interest out of these tracks. And these variables of interest are different depending on your scientific field and your research question and the lab you're working in. But broadly, one large category falls under this, what I call motion quantification. So you maybe want to measure speed, the orientation of the animal or its different body parts. Sometimes you want to see what areas of the environment the animal is visiting or how far it has traveled between point A and point B. All of those are kind of simple kinematic motion calculations that you may want to do with the data to answer your research question. But there are multiple problems you encounter when you try to do that. First of all, there's a general lack of standardized data formats and tools in this field. So even though we have many tools for doing the tracking, each one of them saves data in a completely different format. So it's kind of hard to try one or two tools and then analyze the data. We have a proliferation of fragile in-house scripts for doing the motion quantification step. So every PhD student I know or every postdoc I know in this field writes their own script in Python, MATLAB, or R for computing speed and orientation and head direction. And this causes a lot of duplication of work. And it's very error prone because it's easy to make a mistake in these calculations. And these scripts are seldom maintained after a project ends. So after the student leaves the lab or after the paper is published, normally nobody can run the script anymore, and we have to start from the beginning. This is leading us as a field in a situation where we have piles of unanalyzed motion tracking data. The good news is that we can produce motion tracking data very fast and easily now. The bad news is that we are producing it so easily that we cannot catch up with our analysis. Basically, we are not as fast at extracting meaning from the data as we are at producing the data, which is a problem that many fields have in the age of machine learning. So how are we trying to solve this problem or try to solve part of it? We are trying to kind of solve it building this general purpose toolbox, Python toolbox we call movement. And this slide gives you an overview of what movement does at a very high level. I will give you this overview and then I will dive a bit deeper into each of its components. So the basic idea is that movement sits downstream of motion tracking tools like DeepLabCAD, Sleep, and others. So movement itself does not do any pose estimation or tracking. I want to be very clear about that. It just reads the outputs of these tools. Once the outputs are read, they are represented in Python in a very standardized data format that we have developed, which is based on the Python library Xarray. They're represented as multidimensional arrays. I will also explain that in a bit. And once the data is in this format, it's very easy to do operations on it. And what kind of operations do we do in movement? You can clean the data, so you can apply various kinds of filtering operations. You can select subsets of data. You can visualize the data with like quick plots or interactively, and you can analyze the data to derive the variables that you're interested in. I will go a bit into about the data format specifically. This is the most technical bit of the talk, but I think it's important to get an idea of how the data is organized in movement if you're ever going to use the package. So we don't store the data in a long table, but in a multidimensional array. And let's imagine a concrete example where you have 3 mice, each of them tracked with 6 key points. We represent this data in an array we call position. And this is a special array because it's labeled. So basically, along each dimension of the array, you have coordinates labeling what you find at that coordinate. So for example, the first axis is time, when you have different frames of the video, but they can be labeled with the seconds at which the frame was acquired. You have a space axis, which are the special dimensions, which could be either XY if you do 2D tracking or XYZ if you do 3D. You have the key point axis, which is labeled by the names of those body parts, let's say snout, left ear, right ear, and so on. And you have the individuals axis, which are the different animals, which are represented here with colors, for example, ID 0, 1, or 2, or it could be the names of the mice. Why we like this format? First of all, it's very general and very flexible. So the example I'm showing here is a mouse, but this kind of representation works for any kind of animal species, any kind of tracking, single or multi-animal, 2D or 3D. Basically, it can represent data from a vast array of experiments. And because it's stored in this multidimensional array format, it's very easy to access any arbitrary subset of the data you want. So basically, you can very easily say, give me a slice of the data where I see only data for mouse 1 from 100 to 200 seconds from the left and the right ears. And this happens very fast and efficiently. And often, position is not the only data array you get in movement. You also get some additional arrays with some metadata. In pose estimation, it's very common to have a confidence array, which is the one thing I'm showing on the right, which is for each detected key point, it's how confident the network was, the neural network was at identifying the key point. And this is useful when you clean the data. So far, the example I've talked about is this pose estimation example, but we also have ways of representing data from tracked bounding boxes, which is a similar representation, but slightly different. We keep track of the position of the center of the box and also the shape of the box, let's say the width and the height. And we are currently in discussions of how we can use a similar approach to represent tracked segmentation masks, which is a bit trickier, but we are working towards that because this approach is becoming much more popular with the advent of tools like Octron. Okay, so what are the benefits of having this data representation? Well, first of all, this kind of data representation serves as a kind of a bridge between many different data formats. As I mentioned, we can read motion tracking data from pose estimation tools, and this is not a complete list. You can see a complete list on our website of all the supported formats. But because we use Python scientific stat and Xarray, it's also very easy to export this data to kind of scientific array standards like ZAR or NetCDF. And you may not be familiar with these file types, but there are very efficient ways to store large amounts of data in a compressed way that doesn't explode kind of the size on disk or in memory. And this is quite handy, especially if you have large amounts of data. And we have also built methods to read and write data from neuroscience standard file formats like Neurodata Without Borders. And this is a growing list. So we are constantly adding more and more formats because we want movement to serve as the kind of universal converter, if you will, between the different types. So, okay, now we got the data into Python and we have it in the standardized format. What can we do with it? The very first thing you often want to do is to clean the data. I'm sure you're aware that neural networks make mistakes, and some mistakes are very common in this kind of markerless tracking approaches. For example, the network can very easily confuse the left ear with the right ear, swapping them. Sometimes key points are occluded behind an obstacle and they're not visible. Sometimes there is a jitter in the detections, and the time series of trajectories are very jittery, not representing the truth of the matter, and things like that. So we have filtering module in Python, which allows you to apply some simple heuristics to clean the data. These are things like rolling average filters or rolling median filters, interpolation methods for bridging gaps where the key point was absent. We have various smoothing approaches and approaches for filtering the data based on confidence values. So you can use them in combination, and when you do that in movement keeps a log of all the pre-processing operations you did. So it's very easy later when you come back to the data to know exactly what transformations and what pre-processing the data has undergone. You can also make some quick visualizations to inspect the data. We have currently two functions, one for plotting the central trajectory of the animal over time, and another one for plotting the occupancy heat map, so which areas of the environment the animal has visited most often. But this is also something that we are planning to expand on with more and more kind of handy quick plots. But probably the most important bit is the bit I mentioned earlier about extracting variables of interest. And in movement, we have a module called movement kinematics that does that. And the input for that module is always a position array. So this array of positions of detected key points with the standard axis, like time, space, key points, individuals. And what comes out are various variables of interest. So for now, we have a bunch of variables for quantifying how fast the animal is moving, basically. So we have displacement, both forward and backward. We have velocity, acceleration, speed, kinetic energy. We also have some functions to compute the orientation of the animal in space, let's say the direction of the head. And these functions can return either a vector or an angle with respect to some reference direction. So here you see a polar histogram of a head direction angle that we have calculated with movement. And we also have various functions for computing distances, either distances between key points, pairs of key points, or pairs of individuals. You can use them to see how far, let's say, two mice are from each other, or how far is the nose from the tail base, and so on. And there's another kind of distance which we call path length, which is how far the animal has traveled between time point A and time point B. As with everything else in Python, this list is also slowly expanding. So while we started from the very basic, the most universally useful variables, we are slowly adding more and more specialized variables that are useful in a subset of fields. So how do you actually use movement? So far, I've talked about all the ways, all the calculations you can do with it, but how do you actually do it? This is not a tutorial, so I will not go too deep into the scripts, but I just wanted to show you an example of what a typical script might look like so that you know it's not scary. So in this example, we load a dataset from an H5 file. We have the path here. We specify the source software, in this case, developcat, and we also specify the frames per second. And this creates a movement dataset, which is stored in this ds variable. Then we can go on and we can select subset of data. In this case here, as an example, I select a time window between 600 and 2400 seconds, but I could have selected any other arbitrary subset. Then I call a rolling filter operation, specifically a rolling median filter, on this position data, and I get a new variable called position smooth, which I also store in the same dataset as an additional array. Then I go on to compute speed based on the smooth position variable, and again I get a new variable called speed, which I also store in the dataset. And then I can save the dataset to file, and this saves both the raw data and all the variables I've derived through my preprocessing and my computations, which is great for reproducibility. And don't worry about that script too much because we have many more such scripts and much more comprehensive online. So I want to show you that if you go on our website, you can click on this examples tab, and this contains a bunch of essentially Jupyter notebooks that we have made, or our contributors have made, or our collaborators have made for doing all kinds of things in Python, like pupil tracking, smoothing post tracks, scaling the data, computing head direction. And once you open one of these examples, you can kind of read through it on the website, but you can also go to the end and you can download the entire Python script, or you can download it as a Jupyter notebook, or you can launch this example on a website so you can run it interactively on your browser without having to install anything. And this is one way I recommend people start with movement. So if you're interested in trying it out, if it's something that could be useful for you, I recommend starting with these examples. Apart from scripting, though, we are also interested in having a graphical user interface. And there are various advantages to graphical user interface. One advantage is that it's more accessible to users without much Python experience. So we also want to kind of make it easy for them, for those users, to do certain operations in the movement. And having a graphical user interface is also very convenient for doing certain kinds of operations, and mostly interactive exploration of the data. The next slide, I had prepared a kind of a demo as a video, but I will stop this. And instead, I will attempt to do a live demo, and we'll see how far that goes. So I will now bring up my graphical user interface. I hope you can see the window here. It should say Napari 0.7 in the middle. So Napari is a Python viewer. It's an image viewer for Python. It's a very cool tool, but if you don't know it, don't worry. You don't need to know much about it. The graphical user interface we've made as a plugin for Napari, which means that the movement plugin for Napari appears here on the right-hand side, which allows you to do stuff with motion tracking data. The first thing I will do is I will load a video as a background for what I'm gonna do next. So basically, I can select a video from a folder, and I can drag and drop it inside Napari. And this appears on the left. This is a so-called image layer. So this holds the video data. And I can interact with this data like a normal video viewer. So I can basically jump to different parts of the video. I can zoom in, I can zoom out. I can also play the video. By clicking arrows, I can go back and forward frame by frame. But so far, nothing new because you cannot do it in any video player, essentially. What I will do next is overlay some motion tracking data on top of this video. So here on the right, you can select the source software. Here I've selected movement because it's data I've already pre-processed with movement. And there I can select the file on my folder where the data is stored. I select this file. I click load. Let's zoom out. And when you click load, it looks empty, but don't worry, there are some things that have happened. So first of all, you get two new layers. So you get one layer called points and another one called tracks. Let's see what these are. So if I go forward in the video a bit, okay, here is my mouse. Let me hide the tracks layer for now and zoom in. So the points layer, as its name suggests, holds the key point data. So basically, I can see the detected key points. I can hover over a given key point and I will see some metadata for it. So the confidence value, the key point name, the individual name. And I can also click on display text to see like labels for all detected key points. I can turn it off. So what's in the tracks layer? So if I now visualize the tracks layer, you see that this tail extending in the past, which shows the previous positions of these key points in the previous frames. And by default, you see it from the very beginning of the video, but this is a configurable behavior, so you can select tracks and then play with the tail length. So if I shrink the tail length, I can basically play with how far in the past I see. If I go all the way to 0, I can also go the other way. So there's something called head length, which allows you to see in the future. So basically you see now the feature positions. You get the idea. I can also play the video with the tails enabled, which is very useful actually for identifying tracking errors. These features I've showcased, you already have it. So if you install Movement today, you will get all this functionality. But we are also working on some new widgets that do helpful things. And I will showcase one now, which is not yet released, but hopefully will be in the next weeks. So I will expand this define regions of interest widget. I will add a new layer. This creates a new layer here on the left, which is called regions. And on this layer, you can draw shapes. For example, you can see a barrier here in this video marking a border. Maybe I can draw a line to represent this barrier. This line appears here on the table. I can give it the name I want, say border. I can also draw rectangles and circles and so on. So next I will draw a rectangle and another one. I can also draw polygons. You got the idea. Once I have drawn everything I need, I can save the layer to a file, basically. Give it a name, save, and now I have it in the file, which is great because when I come back to it the next day in Python, I can use those regions of interest. So what I can do later is I can load these regions of interest into Python as polygons on lines, and I can use them in my kind of movement analysis. So for example, I can compute distances and angles relative to those regions from the perspective of the animal. For example, I can ask how far is the animal from a given object, or what's the orientation of the animal relative to that object. That's already possible in movement. I can also compute region occupancy. So if a given hit point or a given animal is within or without a given region. So this is the kind of an overview of the functionality we have so far in movement. But I want to now zoom out again, and I want to talk about the bigger picture of where we see how we think about movement as a tool and where we see it going in the future. Well, one primary goal is to keep things light. So I talked about how movement sits downstream of the motion tracking tools, and it serves this type of motion quantification. It's essentially a single purpose tool in the sense that it does very easy things, very simple things, no AI, no complication, things that you could do yourself if you scripted, if you wanted to kind of script in a day, but we do it in a manner that's fully documented, fully validated, 100% tested. So basically, it's less error prone than something that you code in an afternoon, hopefully. And we are very wary of adding dependencies that would compromise kind of the lightness of the package because we want it to be easy to install on any kind of hardware. So the package is available on PyPI on the Forge. It works across operating systems, Windows, Apple, and Linux. And it also requires no dedicated GPU, which means that you can run it on any sort of laptop that a student might have. It should work on the laptop. If it doesn't work, let us know and we will fix it. So the primary goal is to have a very lightweight tool that allows you to explore the data and to do the simple calculations without you having to pay for GPUs or for cloud compute. And generally, our long-term vision is to make movement into something like a scikit image for animal motion data, so kind of an integral part of the scientific Python ecosystem that deals with this kind of data. Scikit image, for those of you that don't know it, is a general purpose Python library for doing all sorts of image processing things like filtering images, convolution, thresholding, etc. We want to do the same thing, but for motion tracking data. And by the way, if you don't like Python and you prefer R, there is a collaborator of ours called Mikkel Roald Arbol. He has made a similar library in R. He calls it AniMovement, and we are in collaboration with him to make sure that you get similar experience in both tools. So if you are a fan of R, check out this tool because it covers a similar scope to what I talked about. Some of you may be wondering, I have not mentioned at all so far behavior segmentation. So what is behavior segmentation? Behavior segmentation is taking the continuous motion time series that we get out of tools like DeepLabCat and then segmenting them into distinct behaviors that a human can name. For example, in the mouse, it would be rearing, walking, grooming, etc. So nowadays, this task is done also with neural networks, and there are multiple inputs you can feed into this task. So you can either directly feed it video features extracted from the video, you can feed it the motion tracks that DeepLabCat or similar tools output, or you can feed it the kinematic features that are derived from these motion tracks. So movement does not do this. So the movement itself does not do behavior segmentation, mostly of this desire to keep it lightweight. But this does not mean that it's not useful for behavior segmentation. What do I mean? I mean, one way you can envision using movement in behavior segmentation is using it to do the input-output thing. So basically using it to read different file formats so you can do segmentation on them. And this is already the case. So for example, two behavior segmentation libraries, VAME and Lisbeth, are already depending on movement for doing that. So basically they are delegating the complicated file parsing logic to us so that they can focus on the segmentation bit. And I think more tools will do that in the future. The other thing you can delegate to movement is this business of motion quantification, because using the movement functions, you can derive features from the motion tracks, and then you can use these features to train your networks for behavior segmentation. But the synergy can go a bit further because we can also gain from the output that the behavior segmentation tools output. For example, it would be nice to take these labels like rearing, walking, and grooming and load them back into movement so we can analyze them in conjunction with all of our kinematic data. So essentially, we are working on ways to import the labels into Python, align them to the motion tracking data so we can ask questions like, when the animal was grooming, what was its speed, or what was the speed of its whiskers, and stuff like that. And we want to make it easier for people to kind of align multimodal streams. And this also includes neural data. So we work with a lot of neuroscientists, and they are interested in spike times and calcium imaging of neurons. And it would be very nice to be able to align those time series with the behavioral time series helped by movement, so that you can answer questions like, what was the neural activity of this brain area when the mouse was doing a given behavior? So this is kind of as a teaser of where the package is going into the future. So our future plans is do more of what we do well. So basically more file format supported, more kinematic functions, more cleaning approaches, more features for the graphical user interface, but also allow users to define behaviors and events of interest so that they can analyze them in conjunction with their movement data and make it easier for people to synchronize their behavioral time series with non-behavioral time series. So some closing words about how we approach the development of movement. So it's a really community-driven project. And what do I mean by that? So the core team developing movement is based in London at the Sainsbury Wellcome Centre and UCL. We call ourselves the Neuroinformatics Unit because we develop kind of informatics tools for neuroscience and for behavior. And this team is led by Adam Tyson, and it's a larger group, but there are three of us focusing specifically on behavior. And this is myself, Chang Kwan Lo, and Sofia Mignano. And basically, these three people we are the maintainers of movement. So we are the ones who kind of respond to requests. We are the ones who are driving the agenda. But this does not mean that we develop all the code. In fact, we accept contributions from anyone in the world, and people have been contributing. So we have collaborators in other labs, for example, in the Keshavarz lab in Cambridge, but also other engineering groups like UCL's Advanced Research Computing. And the idea is that we collaborate with groups to add support for domain-specific features. For example, the Keshavarz lab was interested in spatial navigation, and they worked together with us to add support for things like region of interest because they needed that in their workflow. And this is a model that we can also expand in the future, that we can kind of partner up with specific labs and groups to help us develop features useful for given applications. Apart from these official partnerships, we also have a host of volunteer contributors from different research institutes across the world, but also non-researchers. And I'm very proud that we have 42 people who have contributed code so far in movement, and this is growing rapidly with over 370 merged pull requests. If you want to be a part of that, so if you want to either use movement and contribute to movement, I've put all the relevant links there for you. So basically the website, our GitHub repository, Zulip chat, which we use kind of like Slack to talk with each other and with our users. We also run community calls every 2 weeks to allow anyone to join on Zoom and chat with us about ongoing developments in movement, or just to hang around and meet each other. And essentially, we are trying to be very open to our users so that there's a continuous interaction between developers and users, and hopefully some users also become developers gradually. And I've also put there our social media channels of the group and of myself if you want to follow us. I will also mention that we are running an annual workshop we call Animals in Motion. This runs in August and it's part of a larger summer school. And there we teach movement, but also other open source tools for analyzing animal behavior. Unfortunately, the registrations for this year are closed, but this is something we will repeat annually, hopefully. So keep an eye out for next year's announcements. And I've also here linked a handbook, an online handbook, which contains all the course materials for this course. So if you cannot come or it's too late to apply, you can review the materials at your own leisure. These very slides I've been presenting are also online, so I'll put the link in the chat shortly so you can also review the slides later, and those contains all the links you will need. At this point, I will not stop and open the floor for questions. What I really want to hear is, what do you think about movement? What would you like to see more of in movement? What you are missing? How are you thinking about using it, not using it? I would very much like to hear about all those things. And yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you.